everything off.
Hey everybody, Brandon with Bearded CB82. So today on this video, this is going to try to be a little bit more educational, as much step by step as I can, and also kind of answer a question that a subscriber had on a video. This one obviously is titled Drivelines. Number of issues that you can encounter with drivelines. One of the probably foremost that you'll see, especially if you're servicing units, will be, of course, with Ujoints. Yes, these guys. And yes, they're big. They're not light by any means either. Now, a little bit about Ujoints. One way is how I would put it, that as I'm up underneath testing them, up, down, all four directions up against inside the yoke, is I look for movement. Now, that's what people say. Now, how much movement? You got to kind of eyeball it. Relatively, for the most part, if you see at least a 1/16 of an inch in any which direction, even if it doesn't wobble the other direction, odds are it's shot. That's just plain and simple. And I will turn the camera around and show you guys what I mean by shot. Now, some of you, if you've got any other questions, please ask them down below, and I'll either try to answer them as best I can when I'm able to. Now, keep that in mind. Sometimes on weekends, I might be busy doing other things, and sometimes weeknights, might be busy editing videos or going to bed early. It's just one of those things. So, as I was saying, 1/16 of an inch in any which direction would mean bad. Now, and that's before you grease it. If it's bad, don't grease it. If it's a customer unit, you alert your service manager or your service writer or whoever so that they can let the customer know that it's bad. Now, for our U-joints that we keep a few of them on hand. And if it's to the point where, say if we've got one, like one we did not too long ago where I did the power divider swap on it. Here's your air compressor for all that miss it. The number 3 U-joint, which was right at the power divider, was bad. The number 2 U-joint, which was right at the carrier bearing, was bad. And since we were underneath there doing all the rest and having to drop all that other stuff out of there to get it out of the way, we replaced the number 1 at the transmission yoke as well. How much longer before that one would have went in between, it's hard to say, but a lot of our units are starting to get up there in mileage, the better part of 1,000,000 miles, and they're kind of going one by one, even with carrier bearings. Okay guys, sorry about the angle here, but as I was saying, here on the U-joint. Now if you look, you can kind of see a little bit of wear right there, but most of the U-joint looks fair on that end. And if you look right here, it looks relatively fair on that end as well. These are the caps that went with it. But as I flip it over, you see that right there where you have the lines. That is called Brinelling, and that's the first stage of things going bad. This is where you would get barely, maybe at most, hardly a 1/16 of an inch movement, because you have that going on. And then if you get, well, relatively double that, as you can see from there, it's because you've got that going on. And that's bad. That is severe Brinelling. Occasionally, it might only look as bad as that one right there, all the way around though. But you'll still get a 1/16. Give you a demonstration here, like barely, oh that's too much, like barely a 1/16 of movement on that, if that. So what you see right there to there, that's bad. Now on to the other stuff. Alright, excuse me, but like I said in my last video, I left my tall tripod in the back of the truck from when I went to the range the other day. So, obviously, like I said, I've already got a video using this guy late one night when I was already pissed off. And because of just how cheap parts went. And then for the yoke, I do have some footage on this. I'll go ahead and insert that here. I had to look for it, but it's some old, back when I still was using the GoPro. And then the Master Yoke heavy duty kit. I might or might not have some video on this from back when I was still using the GoPro. We'll see. So I'll put it in right after this. But here you have all your different sizes, metric and standard, typical with heavy duty U-joints. Or heavy duty yokes. Well, yeah, your U-joint straps go into the yoke, so those would be the bolts that you would use that come with it. All fine thread. Then you have your shaft, and then your driver. And your driver is clocked to coincide with this because it just threads into this guy. And do keep this greased. But if you put your impact in forward, it'll take it off. You've got your smaller yoke set here, your wider yoke set here, and these are the ones we do use the most. And this is a little bit greasy because I did use the crap out of it here today and last week a couple times. So it is what it is. But this kit here, I'll post a link to it on Amazon. You guys do your own shopping. If you've got your own shop, these are pretty expensive as well. And they do have lighter duty versions of these that do start dropping in price. You got to look, make sure you're heavy duty, medium duty, light duty, and on down the line. But as far as pulling a yoke clean off of a power divider or drive shaft, if you're doing for instance, the carrier bearing, this comes in handy. Sometimes the one on the carrier bearing will slide off with, you just tap it with a dead blow a few times and she might nudge off. Sometimes not so lucky, and you do have to resort to this. So your Tiger tool sets, like I said, shop wise, this would be a shop expense. but shop-wise, they would be worth it, every penny. And the tool that we use a lot for pulling U-joints, this guy right here, this tiger tool. Now I do already have a video on that, and I'll post a link to that video up here for all that want to go see it. And I'll try to leave a link down in the description box or at the end of the video as well for that particular one. Made in Canada, the Tiger Tool 10102 heavy duty U-joint tool. These are expensive. This is a shop tool item. I do not own this. The shop owns this. They're expensive, but they're totally worth it, 100%. Now next up on driveline issues, carrier bearings. Oh wait, where's the bearing? Now this one, it was starting to dry rot. We'll flip the camera around here in a second, take a closer look at that. It's also starting to get chewed up inside. As you can tell, you had all sorts of free movement in here. I didn't even have to, occasionally you might get some funky bearing stuff. You might have to cut these off through the holes I use my power Sawzall, my air powered one. It works real quick getting that off there so I can pull it away from the bearing itself. And it's just one of those things. This one didn't even have to do that, just yanked it right off. A little bit of dry rot, like I said, we'll take a look at that here closer in a minute. Question the one guy had, if he's got a channel, I'll put a link to it right up here. I just forget right off the top of my head. Who asked me was a yoke puller. Now the yoke puller set that we have is this tiger tool. Yes, I know there's a pattern here, but there's a reason for it. And we'll go ahead and take a look at this here in a second as well. So bear with me, it's all coming together. Now about the rest of that, like I said, we had plenty of free movement of the bearing up, in, and around in here. The bearing itself was still tight together. It's just the housing was just worn. It was shot, and it wouldn't take too much longer before it'd start wearing into this or burn a hole clean through it and rest on top of your steel here. And then you got to send a drive line in. You have a truck down for Lord knows how long, because maybe you have to buy a new drive line because it might have damaged it that far. There's some varying options there. And either way, it's easy to just spend a little bit of time to take this pain in the butt thing off, put a new one on, than it is to have a truck down for a day, 2, maybe 3 days, depending on parts. Maybe it's a weekend and it's going to take longer. It's a lot of money out the door. Now, one way... Now the way after I pull the rubber and everything else away, get these off, is I take a little bitty air saw. Here's the outer race. Now you do have a keeper portion on each side. Those tear away quite readily. These races are pretty hard, relatively thick, but I'll take it and cut it in half with a air grinder. Got it, a little bitty one. And that works quite well. Usually it'll take one disc for the whole shebang, and I'll show you more here. Pull that off, pull the other half off, and then that will expose your bearings. Now here's the bearings in particular off that one. Yeah, they were kind of grimy now. They were a little bit bad set before. They were getting ready to go as well. Pretty dry because it is a pre-greased ordeal. And then, since I have it here in front of me, here would be the other half of that race. Your inner race, and this is where some people might have some issues. The first time I replaced one, I had issues. Wound up having to take the torch. Thought if I heated it up enough, I'd be able to smack it off with a big pry bar and a heavy hammer. Didn't work. Heat it up red, try it again, Didn't work. Boss went over to my boss at that point in time and said, "What's the trick?" He's like, "Cut it with the torch." But then you're cutting into the driveline. Cut it with the torch. So grooved it off enough, blew off enough with a torch to where it would split, then the rest of the ring would come off. Since then, I've kind of wisened up a little bit, found my own little trick. As I said, by the point in time you go through the outer races with this, this is burned away enough to where you can start grinding into it. As you can see, I grind most of the way into it as much as I can across the top, and if I happen to nick the drive shaft just a little bit with it, this is a dry glass fit. I just take a little bit of emery cloth, buff stuff down. It's not going to really affect the drive line if you just nick it. And what I do, I take my chisel, smack it, it separates, and then I can guide it off, and most of the time it'll come off just like this. That's a little bit of inside for those of you that might come across it. And that is also where a decent chisel will come into play. Bearing races are some of the hardest material you're going to come across in the shop. It is what it is, and you can do it like that, and then it just all slides off nice, neat, and you don't have a whole bunch of hot metal everywhere. Well, there you go. Buffer off, emery cloth, put the new one on, take your race drivers, drive it on evenly as much as you can, unless your shop actually happens to have an actual driver. It makes it a little faster. Then you set your yoke back up there, put your washer on, your lock ring back on, or your lock nut back on, zipper down to spec, or as close as you can kind of get. Some of you guys know where I'm going with that. And that's done. I know, I wish I had some video of it, but it's a little different these days. Maybe one of these days, if I have a really, really slow day, it's on a weekend maybe, to where I don't have other stuff going on, might be able to get some footage of it. But we'll talk about that down the road. So there you have it. Some issues you might run into with Drivelines, some of the tools that you can use to resolve those issues. Problems, dilemmas, pains in the rear end, and they do make, well, especially the heavy duty tools, they do make your life a lot easier getting these out. You're not sitting there with the dual cable system. Just take an 1.25 inch socket on your 1/2 inch impact, or an 1.25 inch if you've got a 3/4 inch smaller impact, and go to town, remove the parts you need to remove, service them, and get the truck back out the door. And the quicker you can do that with a heavier duty tool, the more money you might save your company, or the more money you might save your customer. And in that, some places where if you meet the SRT, whatever you are under that, they add on to your paycheck. So, some things to keep in mind. Works faster, gets you a little bit more money in some cases now, doesn't it? So, like I said, any other questions about anything here, any issues that I've had, any problems with components, anything about the tools, leave them down below. And anybody else that has had experience with that as well, by all means, leave your experiences and what type of tools you may have good experiences with down below as well for others to learn from. And, well, until next time, shop safety is just as important as firearm safety. If you screw something up, somebody could die. Later.